Are you looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this football and basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select two or more players, pick more or less on their projections for a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the PrizePicks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, PrizePicks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/bluewire and use code BLUEWIRE. That's code BLUEWIRE at prizepicks.com/bluewire for a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
Support for this podcast comes from Frito-Lay and the 2023 Snack Bracket Championship. The Frito-Lay Snack-It Challenge is underway, and fans are voting on their favorite snacks to crown champion. We're talking about prime-time matchups between the best 64 snacks in the land. Will Ruffles Ridges reign supreme? Can Doritos defend their dynasty? Or will Smart Food use their smarts for a surprise upset? Only you can decide. Get in on all the action for a chance to win up to $1,000 or a year's worth of snacks. Let your snacks be heard. Just go to fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com to vote and enter for a chance to win. No purchase necessary. Sweepstakes ends April 3rd, 2023. Void where prohibited. Year's worth of snacks awarded in the form of 52 coupons, each good for one bag of chips. See official rules at fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com.
Hello, friends. Kirk Henderson and Josh Bowe joining you for an episode of Mavs Moneyball After Dark. We are recording a little after 9 o'clock on Sunday, June 12th. I don't know when I'm going to actually post this, though. Maybe Monday afternoon, because I just recorded a short Moneyball minute, and I don't. It seems like I went like 4 days without recording anything, and now I'm like, I want to record all the things. But Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. We're both, I think you're a little bit better off today, but I'm sure anyone in the area from the Dallas area listening, we're all pretty much melting right now. But so what better way to ignore the sweat dripping down my forehead than let's talk.
Yeah, why not? So we had some really nice feedback to our kind of season in review podcast, and this we're going to do something similar for the playoffs because it's now been, even another week away from it. We've had time to settle. And, Josh and I are not draft guys. We will never claim to be draft guys. And I think after, the fact that we're going to be hurt about what's his name over in Memphis until the end of time, I think both of us are just like never going to invest in draft stuff again. And so it's like, even though everybody's sort of clamoring for more of that, we thought we'd look back a little more. And I think I'm going to do that a few more times before I really cast ahead. We had a nice show during the week with Scott, CBA Mavs, who did, he's so funny because I can tell he's like, I just don't know if I explained this stuff well enough. I'm like, man, this is like explaining taxes to someone who has never filed taxes before. It's hard. And it's hard to make interesting and straightforward without being, what's the word? Like without inadvertently talking down to people. And I thought Scott did a really good job, both in his post and on the podcast of breaking down complex stuff and saying, hey, this is what we have. What did you think?
Oh, yeah, it's great. When you're trying to break that stuff down, it almost sounds like you're speaking another language. And yeah. It goes to show, to try to be an educated NBA fan, it's so difficult with the CBA. Like I don't follow as other sports as closely as I used to, but the NBA has to be the most complex CBA out there. It's pretty bananas. So I think Scott does a great job. I think when he's on the podcast, he does great. I think his pieces that he does are really great, and I think it's really nice because I think it's a nice, we're not trying to like crush hopes and dreams. We're just trying to be realistic with what these are the rules. And I know some rules are meant to be broken, but sometimes there's nothing you can do about this stuff. So it's just nice to have out there. And what's really fun, and I know that Scott's stuff, whether it's his podcast or his articles, I know they're making an impact, is when I start seeing like all the crazy fake trades on Twitter like reflect the stuff that Scott has talked about. And that's when our former staffer, Lauren, who loves, diving into the off season. She's been producing a lot of fake trades, and all of them, she's like working within the rules that Scott made. And yeah, maybe they are pretty crazy, but they're still like, hey, people are noticing what Scott's doing, or they're using him to jump off and explore the CBA themselves. So like that's cool. Like it's not just the crazy stuff that we see flung out there every year. Like I can actually see like a tangible impact of people trying to fit stuff in within the CBA rules now.
Yeah, which is nice because it's going to be hard for the Mavericks. But, well, we'll talk about that stuff a little more. But right now, what I wanted to do was just sort of throw back a little bit to the playoffs and kind of go beat by beat, bigger picture of what we were thinking during elements of this, because it's crazy when you look at, the playoffs started Saturday, April 16th. We didn't know how long Luka was going to be out. It was really sort of a depressing point. And then we basically talked about basketball every day to every other day from Saturday, April 16th, straight through to Thursday, May 26th, which was almost 6 full weeks. I guess I didn't realize it was quite that long. And the Mavericks played 18 games, and they were 18, correct? Yeah. So they got 6, 7, and 5. And they were hilarious 9-9 in those games. So it's like we start off like I can't believe this is this long ago. It's almost 2 full months at this point when the Mavericks started off with the Jazz. And that opening game was something because it was without Luka, and there was a lot of missed free throws, and there was a lot of just missed opportunities. I feel like I remembered in that game, I'm looking at the box score now, Mavericks lost 99-93, and Spencer Dinwiddie finished with this really nice looking stat line. And I remember being angry and thinking that he played a terrible game. Do you remember any of this?
Yeah, I do. It was a pretty terrible game. I don't think anyone shot well, particular, but yeah, I think it was really disappointing to see Dinwiddie have the game that he had. He had 22 points because he got to the free throw line 16 times, which was pretty remarkable. But he was 6 of 15 from the floor. So he didn't shoot well. He was 0-4 from 3. I think what was really disappointing about that game, and looking at it now, it's not like the worst game he had in the playoffs. He would actually, stoop to some low levels, especially during the Suns series. But I think what was so disappointing was, what he did in the regular season when Luka wasn't playing. I think he had like a 36-point game against the Kings. He had like another high 20 or 30-point game. Like I think Luka only missed like 2 or 3 games after the Dinwiddie trade, but after each one Dinwiddie started, he had monster games. So there was a lot of expectation that, hey, even though Luka's out, Dinwiddie's going to step right in and it's going to look different, but he's going to ball out, and it's going to, the Mavs are going to be fine. And so to see that game right off the bat, both him and Brunson kind of had egg on their face after that first game. It was pretty disappointing, despite the fact that they were missing Luka.
Yeah, and I remember there being a lot of griping about the fouls in this game, and that was really something. But that's, I don't want to do game by game because it's pretty nuts. But this was one of those where there was like 2 camps of people, where people thinking that if the Mavericks won this game, they could have just like swept the Jazz. And then there's us who were like, but then there's the game 2 Supernova, where Jalen Brunson played perhaps his finest game as a Dallas Maverick player. Is that crazy?
I think so. I mean, it was his career high in points. I don't think he's ever had a 40-point game otherwise.
I mean, the list of players who've had 40-point games in the playoffs in the Mavericks uniform, I remember it's like he shot 15 of 25 from the floor, went 6 of 10 from 3. Like that was his big 3-point game, got to the line 7 times. He was just magnificent. And the crazy part is when you go look at it, it's like the Mavericks needed every single point from him. Every single point.
Yeah, I mean, it was remarkable. That was the game where we were like starting to think, okay, are the Jazz, like, what's wrong with the Jazz? I mean, it was obvious, it was great to see the Mavericks win, but I think that was the game, and then especially that got doubled down in game 3, where I think the Mavericks were poking holes in the Jazz, and it kind of started a little bit in game 1, but it kind of really fully solidified there in game 2. And yeah, the crazy part is he had 41 points. I mean, he basically had I don't know what his usage rate was, but it was huge. And he had 0 turnovers. He had 4 turnovers total in the entire Utah series. Brunson did, which is maybe one of the crazier stats I've ever seen. He averaged 0.7 turnovers per game while playing 38 minutes a game in a 6-game playoff series as a lead point guard. That's That's bananas. That's one of the crazier things I've seen. You know, a 40-point game with 0 turnovers is pretty rare in the playoffs.
And then they came back out in game 3 and really, really punched. Just because Luka sat that game too.
Yep.
And Brunson once again. So over a 2-game stretch, this is crazy to think about. Over a 2-game stretch, Brunson he was 15 of 25. So he went 27 of 47 over a 2-game stretch.
72 points and 1 turnover.
and you're looking at the box, and Spencer Dinwiddie was once again terrible. He was 6 of 21 from the floor. He had 20 points because he got to the line a lot. And it's like this is where it starts to become obvious that the Mavs minutes are hysterical. Because this was the game where they got the big Bertans game and the big Josh, like the only Josh Green game. And maybe the last Josh Green game. Josh Green had 12 points, 3 rebounds, 6 assists, like 2 steals, like did a little bit of everything. It was like the Josh Green game that people want him to have more than once in a blue moon.
Yeah, I mean, he scored 9 points the rest of the playoffs. So that just goes to show what an outlier that game was. Yeah, that game was crazy. The thing that I'll remember about that game, I know we're not trying to do game by game, but the game 3 in Utah, the thing I'll always remember about that game, like I think even years from now, is that me and you have been doing this for a very long time, and I think you have retained more of your fandom than I have, maybe because I've been a little bit too much on the journalistic side of things, and you kind of have to leave that stuff at the door when you're going to games and you're covering stuff.
That's why I don't go to games. I hope everyone knows this. Yeah. Like I would lose my mind in the press box.
Yeah. So, over the 10 years I've been doing this, that part of my brain has slowly kind of eroded, but it kind of woke up in that game 3. Like that was a game where I was watching at home and I was getting up and I was clapping and I was yelling. I don't know why. I think it was, the fact that they didn't have Luka. They were on the road. That Royce O'Neal cheap shot against Brunson in the first half, I think really got to me because it was so blatant, after watching what Brunson was doing. And then the fact that he was able to come back in the game and bury them. And this was like the series was over after this. I know that they played 3 more games after this, but you could have polled 1 million people and 99.9% of them would have said, oh, yeah, this series is over. Like that, they crushed the Jazz's will in this game, much like how the Warriors did it, I think, to the Mavs in that game 2. The Mavs absolutely did it in this game 3. And I really don't think the series was ever in doubt after that game. It was an impressive performance.
Which is fun because it's you move on to game 4 where the Mavericks lost. It was Luka's first game back where he played one of the worst 30-point, 10-rebound games you're ever going to see, where he came down and was the man in the final minute of the game where he looked awful. It's hard to explain how bad he looked in this game, where it's just like they weren't attacking Donovan. They stopped doing all the stuff where they had gotten to like crushing the Jazz. They just went away from it because, like, I don't know, Luka does what he does. And then in the fourth quarter down the stretch, I'm looking at the game logs. I remembered this, but I wanted to make sure. Like the Mavericks take the lead on this crazy. It's a Luka Doncic like runner with about 1:13, and then with 40 seconds left, he drills a step back jumper, put them up 4 points with 40 seconds left. The Mavericks lost.
Yep.
And the Mavericks
lost missed a couple of free throws. Everyone lost their mind.
I mean, yes, where Powell has been incredible, and Luka played really bad defense. And they lose on a last second oop to Rudy Gobert, which tied the series. And I remember you in the post. You were like, the Mavericks are fine. Like, what are we doing? Like, and then of course, just to go ahead and fast forward, like game 5, the Mavericks back in Dallas detonated on the Jazz, beat them by 25. And then the return to Utah in game 6. I did not remember this. I misspoke on a podcast at one point. I did not remember game 6 being as grindy as it was. And it was a slugfest.
Yeah, the last, man, I want to say like the last 5 minutes of that game were just like,
it was awful.
Yeah, some of the most disjointed basketball you'll ever see. And I think the Mavericks went into the fourth quarter with a decent lead. I can't remember. I don't know if it was a double-digit lead, but I mean, I think they had kind of wrestled control of the game.
They were up by 5.
Yeah, and the fourth was just. There were moments in the final minutes where it just kind of felt like, okay, can the clock run out? Like it just felt like.
Bojan Bogdanovic missed a wide open 3-point jumper, and that would have won the game, and it would have been a Game 7 situation. Against the Jazz, and this just what talking about this series. I'm glad we're doing this because there were a couple of moments where basketball, one thing goes differently and the whole series is different. The Mavericks don't win game 2 because Brunson doesn't score 41 points. Instead, he only scores 36.
Right.
And the Mavericks are down 0-2 and they need to rush Luka back. And it was wild. I mean, this series, it ended the Jazz's, basically ended what the Jazz have been trying to do for several years. But it's really crazy how a couple of things different, and maybe we're talking about the Mavericks in a completely different light.
Yeah, that's about as wide open as I think I've seen a guy have a game winner in a playoff game before. Man, that was pretty crazy.
It was all because of a screw up because Spencer Dinwiddie is remarkably bad at defense, but that is what it is.
But they advanced, first playoff win in 11 years.
Well, and then we're on to a few days later to the semifinals against the Phoenix Suns, and the Mavericks had lost, I want to say 11, at least 9 games. It was an uncomfortable.
They had lost 9 straight entering that series.
Yeah, to the Suns, and then they lost 2 more to make it 11. And
none of those games were close.
Oh, I mean, in the first 2 games, this is just like I'm looking at this. Luka scored 80 points, grabbed 17 rebounds, and dished out 15 assists, and they lost both games. And lost both games uncomfortably badly. Like the first game is only 7-point loss, but the Mavericks are down by 20 points.
Yeah, they outscored. They went 35-25 in the fourth quarter to make it look more of a game, but they were never in that game. It was.
This was truly nuts. To where I think this was around the time, I'm pretty sure of this because Mother's Day was the next weekend, where my wife started really sending me dog stuff, and I just sort of and I was like, okay, let's get a dog. I was just like, the season's gonna be over. Season's gonna be, Mother's Day, blah blah blah, and you come back around, and again, it's like we could dip into this, but the simple, like, what I learned from this series is I'd know nothing. Is kind of what I learned from this, because you go back into game 3 and the Mavericks had a high point game from Brunson. It was like the roles, like the two teams switched places, and the Mavericks just beat the pants out of Phoenix in game 3, and then in game 4 was the weird Mother's Day game where there was the incident with the fan. And Chris Paul played probably one of the worst games he's ever played. Only no one talked about it because of, and all of a sudden, Mavericks are up or tied 2-2, and it's like, well, what is happening? And you go right back into Phoenix in game 5, where the Mavericks lost by 30 points. I mean, I remember being like, not despondent, but just being like, well, it's really cool to get 2 games on the Suns. Really cool. Really, really cool. And then, of course, over the next 2 games, need to do some quick math because I'm really bad at this. 113 minus 86.
27.
So over the next 2 games, the Dallas Mavericks outscored the Suns by 60 points.
Yeah, in game 6 and 7, the 2 most high leverage games you can have in a 7-game series. Game 6 and 7 after you've lost a 2-2 game 5, so you're 2 straight elimination games basically, and they
teams that win game 5 win 75% of the time.
Yeah, and it's not, and the Mavericks didn't just get a squeak. It's not like they squeaked through game 6 and 7 and they got a buzzer beater, or they had a crazy ref game, or someone fouled out, or they had just a weird, or Phoenix had a crazy, uncharacteristic shooting slump. I mean, they did shoot pretty poorly in those 2 games, but I mean, I can't remember a team down 3-2 winning game 6 and 7 by the margins that they did, especially the game 7 on the road. I remember the Mavericks won a game 7 against the Rockets in 2005 by 40 points, but they were at home and they were better than that Rockets team. So to be an underdog game 7 on the road and to win, like, that was crazy. I have never seen anything like that. And
it's worth addressing because I just did this on a podcast, the 10-minute one I do. Last week, there was a report that came out that nobody's really talking about this because it's all off the record. And, when something's off the record, it either becomes a bombshell or it comes and goes. And there was record of one Suns player having COVID in game 7 and multiple Suns staffers testing positive, only it never got reported before the game. So it's like, why one of these things? And to be honest, I've said this, like, I've heard stuff as recently as after the game 5 loss. I'm sorry, that after game 5 where the Suns won, that like Chris Paul might have had COVID. Like I heard some weird stuff. Now we're never going to know. It doesn't really matter. And when I say it doesn't really matter, at this point in where COVID is in the trajectory of things, I think of COVID the same way I think of an ankle sprain or something else, in the sense of it's part of life in the NBA. So I know they still have all these protocols and stuff about it, but I think some Mavs fans were really bothered by the notion that, it takes away from the Mavs victory. No, it doesn't. The Mavs still won these games. You don't win games by 60 points. The Mavs beat the crap out of the Suns. And I don't know, am I overthinking that?
No, you don't. I mean, each of the 4 wins in this series they had were convincing. I mean, 3 of the 4 were double digits. 2 of the 4 were by 25 or more. And then the one that wasn't double digits, it was by 9, and they were basically led the entire game from like the first quarter to the final buzzer. So, I mean, like I said, none of those games were flukes where you could like look back and like the game was decided on like a possession, like a crazy possession or 2. Like they thoroughly dominated them. And yeah, I think another part of it too is like, yeah, it doesn't take anything away from the Mavs, but like to beat a team that's, like Phoenix back-to-back games, game 6 and 7, by that, like they embarrassed the Suns in those final 2 games. And, this isn't taking anything away from the Mavs, but it takes 2 to tango. And like the other team melts down, contributes to the it doesn't mean that's the reason you won, but it contributes to the lopsidedness of the score.
And I mean, Avery Johnson's inability to cope in 2007 is arguably a meltdown.
Yeah.
But nobody talks about that. It's the we believes, and that's how it ought to be and I think the further we get away from this, particularly with the fact that the Mavericks found something with their super small ball to an extent, is what I'm going to take away from this series. I just want to ask, did we have any complaints in this about sort of the Mavericks' tactical approaches to stuff? Because what I'm thinking about the Jazz series where like Luka just stopped attacking mismatches.
Yeah, that happened a little bit in game 4, but I think they got better at it in games 5 and 6. Mm-hmm. I would say, I mean, that was the thing I came away most impressed with after those first 2 series, was just the Mavericks' preparedness and their tactical awareness and their strategy. I mean, they took Utah, a team that led the league in 3-point rate, and they were basically one of the lowest 3-point shooting teams in the playoffs. The way that they were able to take away team strengths and still kind of cope and not give it up totally on the other end of the floor or give up some other part of the floor was pretty impressive. Like, the way that they were closing out to Jazz shooters, you're like, okay, well, they might get bit. They're closing out so hard and aggressive. Mm-hmm. They might get bit at the rim and they might give up some paint points. And like that happened, but they were consistently like running shooters off the line, getting help, and forcing the, awkward 10 to 12 footers and weird paint attempts and mid-range shots. And like the way that they kind of knew what they had to do to win those games against Utah. And then against Phoenix, a team that likes to play the mid-range. And it's like, okay, well, you just tried to force a team into the mid-range. What do you do against a team that likes to be in the mid-range? And the way that they were still able to kind of stick to their guns after that game 2 loss, I thought that was really impressive. And the way that they switched things up, and they're like, okay, let's pick up Chris Paul with Reggie Bullock 3/4 court and let's make him earn it. And, let's get, Devin Booker, we trust Finney-Smith on Booker, let's not worry about necessarily, DeAndre Ayton, what he can do. I don't think they panicked after Ayton had that massive game 1, and then Ayton kind of didn't really do much after that. Like, I don't know. It was just really, and then on the other side of the floor, I mean, they just played, it was like, hey, we've got one gear and it's drive and kick, make 3-pointers. And throughout the entire playoffs, I know a lot of people were screaming, like, why don't they get more shots in the paint, all this, yada, yada. And it's like,
not how they're built.
Yeah, guys, this is the roster. And they've built it to play a certain way, and they're going to play it. And it's going to come down to making or missing threes. And to the Mavericks role players' credit, for the first, 13 games of the playoffs. So those first 2 rounds, those role players were making the shots. And I can't deny anything about the way they went about it strategically. Like, even when we get into the Golden State series, they never made a starting lineup change, which is pretty crazy considering,
and arguably the wrong move in hindsight.
Yeah, I just don't know what else they could have done.
Sure.
I think everyone really, I think Dwight Powell has probably worn out his welcome in Dallas, and even as probably one of the remaining guys on Dwight Powell.
He's a great regular season center. He's just not the guy that when the matchups become evident, and I think let's just move right into Golden State. Like, the Mavericks lost the series 4-1. They only won one game. They really should have won game 2.
Yep.
But there were elements of this series from the get-go really starting, and it really started at the top of the third quarter in game 1, where I would like to know what Luka Doncic and the Dallas Mavericks were thinking in their attack approach, because they went at Looney so hard in those first 2 games, and it was a terrible strategic approach. It did not work. They did, Xavier Santos wrote a really good piece for us that Jordan Poole is going to decide the series, and he wrote that the Mavericks should attack Poole relentlessly. Well, that's what Boston's done in the NBA Finals. And the Mavericks should have done the same thing, and they just didn't. They didn't until it was way too late. And I'm really curious. Like we had been, Matt Moore talked about this with me. He was like, I really think it's interesting when Luka picks out probably like the team's best defender and decides he's going to break that person. I mean, he did it to Giannis in a game. He did it to Mikal Bridges, who was an all defense guy. Yep. And against the Warriors, he just sort of decided where. I'm curious if it was him or a coaching decision, because he went at Looney hard and it never worked.
Yeah, it didn't work too great, but again, I don't know. The Mavericks got good shots in this series. I mean, I don't know if offensive execution to me was the reason they lost. They still got up a good amount of good open 3-pointers. I mean, game 2, they shot the hell out of the ball and they just kind of collapsed defensively. Mm-hmm. And then I feel like, the game 3 loss and the game 5 loss and the game 1 loss, I mean, they were like under 30% from 3.
They ran. I mean, this was like, I'm glad you brought this up, because had the Mavericks been the 3 seed, or what was it? Because let's say they had played the Warriors in round 2 is kind of where my head was. I'd be curious to see what, you play out the results of this again, what would have happened, because the Warriors found themselves against the Mavericks in the way that they didn't until late against the Grizzlies. And they came in, they were playing great basketball at the right time. And there was a moment in game 1 where Dorian Finney-Smith got blocked in the corner by 2 Golden State Warriors that effectively took Dorian out of offensive basketball for 2.5 games. Like, someone had to remind him to dribble. But I know what you mean, because there were a lot of really good shots that just didn't go. I just sort of wonder, because they came out, they really got blown off the floor. Third quarters are the Warriors, that's what they do. So, and they've been doing it against Boston too. So it's making me feel a little better about the process, where it's just okay, the Mavericks played a team that was a better, deeper team that also was playing unbelievable basketball at the ideal time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, I think it also, defensively it exposed some weaknesses. Obviously, the Mavericks played 2 teams that really were high volume pick and roll, ball handler, ball screens, and Golden State. It's tough because they were so focused on that kind of offensive attack that, Golden State is kind of a one-of-one team in terms of the way they
really
play.
Hard to defend.
And when you have and it's because there's no guy like Steph that's so good. There are players that are good off ball, but there's no they're role players. MVP players don't play off ball the way Steph does. Like that's just usually not how it works. Like he's the willingness of him to give up the ball, his cardio to hold up running around the court like he does an entire game, and then still be able to do like the MVP stuff where he's got a usage and he's got the he does decide to take over on a possession. Like that's just there's no other superstar like that. He doesn't fit the archetype of like LeBron, Durant, Giannis, these big wings that control the ball and attack and go downhill. Like, I mean, he's just such a unique superstar. And I just think the Mavericks, they struggled a little bit with that. It was a lot of off-ball stuff. That means, you've got your two defensive aces in Finney-Smith and Bullock, and they're able to cover a lot of warts in the previous series with the way those teams played. But when you're playing Golden State and, 4 or 5 of the guys are in motion so much, that means all 5 of your defenders are going to get tested. And there wasn't a lot of hiding spots. And especially when Andrew Wiggins plays well, Luka didn't have anywhere to hide, the Utah series, he could play against Royce O'Neal. Phoenix, he could play against Mikal Bridges or Jay Crowder. I mean, Golden State, that's kind of been, I think, the takeaway from this playoffs. When you look at Golden State and you look at Boston, the 2 last teams, they just seem to always have lineups with 4 or 5 guys that can just do stuff. Not necessarily like 4 or 5 all-stars. Like it's just, Marcus Smart is not an all-star, but he's competent. If you give him the ball, he can dribble and drive and attack and drive and dish. And, look like Jordan Poole and Klay Thompson.
I mean, they have 2 rookies that haven't seen any time in the finals that would get 15 to 20 minutes a game with the Mavericks.
Right. It's
a deep team.
Yeah, deep team for sure. And it's just, it kind of shows, I think these 2, Golden State and Boston, are kind of showing that, the one superstar hub and then just fill in with a bunch of guys that are hyper-specific role. It looks good. When it's working, it looks good. But I think I wonder if Golden State and Boston are kind of shaking up. Because, I mean, it's a copycat league. Like when a team does well, everyone kind of shifts. When LeBron left for Miami, that started the superstar, parade. When Golden State started to rise, all these teams started looking for, how can we get more shooting on the floor? These kind of trends, teams like to follow. And I wonder if watching this, it's going to be, okay, maybe instead of killing our roster by acquiring like 1 or 2 high usage, all-star, all NBA type guys, what if we just had like 1 of those guys or 2 of those guys, but then, we spread out our cap and our resources so that our roster is more even, because it feels like in the playoffs, there's just nowhere to hide. Like there's nowhere to hide. Like the defenses are too good. Like the scouting is too good. The coaching is too good. Like, Bullock and Finney-Smith, the Golden State basically forced them to make plays off the dribble, and those guys just don't do that. And I think that those flaws got exposed, real harshly against Golden State.
Well, and there are some lessons that we learned from this playoff run that I think were pretty instructive to the team building moving forward. I'm glad that it happened, even if the Mavericks, because it's like I keep saying this, like the Mavericks being a Western Conference Finals team next year is unlikely. Not because I think they're bad, but because finishing as a top 4 team is difficult. But you learn a lot in team building lessons. And so I got my one buddy, his name's Jose. He hosts 77 Spaces with Josh, and they do a real fun job and out on Twitter. And every time I talk with them, one of the things that drives Jose crazy is that the Mavericks get crushed on the boards. And I've said to him, I don't think the Mavericks care about rebounding. But where I'm going with that is that, one of the things you kind of took away from this, and then our whole site kind of agrees on this. Now, it doesn't mean we're correct. It's just our site rarely agrees as a whole. The big man, the center, the high paid, big section of your cap center, I don't think that's a thing anymore. And I'm really curious to see where the Mavericks go to address it this offseason, because they do need a different center. They do need a different, but it's like different does not necessarily mean more expensive. So do they go through the draft? Do they find somebody in free agency with their very limited means? You just said something right after season where it's just like, look at what we did with Reggie and Dorian Finney-Smith. What happens if the follow-up to that was like, what happens if you have one more guy in that rotation capable of playing 20 minutes? What do the Mavericks do?
Right. It looks completely different, I would say. Yeah. And you think about, I just don't understand. You just got through Gobert and you just got through DeAndre Ayton and you got killed by Kevon Looney. why is your deduction from that? Let's get a Gobert, or let's trade for a Gobert. Let's money whip an 8 and sign and trade. Like, let's sign one of these centers to a big money contract. And I'm just like, I just don't get it. Like, you look at, I mean, what was Robert Williams? Was Robert Williams of the Celtics? Was he even a lottery pick? I can't.
He might have been later first round, but it's like
27th overall pick in 2018. Like, I mean, Mitchell Robinson was a second round pick. I mean, Looney himself was a late first rounder. Like, it's not to say that big men aren't important. It's just you can fill the gaps without using, your pristine resources. You could do it without getting, spending $20 million a year. You can do it without spending a top 10 draft pick. Like, the Mavericks have the 26th overall pick. I would be over the moon if they tried to get a center upgrade with that pick. 'Cause that's what you do with that range of a draft pick. I think it's been proven over like the last 5 years. You can find a serviceable big man, I think, in that range if your scouting department's good enough and you're committed to it. So that's kind of what I see. It's like every time I say this, some people are like, "Oh, so you just want Dwight Powell and Maxey out there again?" I'm like, no, you could do it without.
We were crushing them in the start of the season. They had 6 centers to start the regular season. They cut 2 of them, and then they signed a third one. It's like, really what they need to do is select the right person.
Yeah, just get better.
Get better players, but get better does not necessarily mean more expensive. It's like big men are the most available of players. Like, just wings are the most coveted. Guards are probably guards and centers are a distant second and third compared to wings. And it's just the way it goes right now. And I think that's how the Mavericks build moving forward. I'm going to be really curious to see what they do, because if I'm a big guy looking to rebuild some value, playing with Luka is a smart way to do that.
For sure. I mean, you look at Willie Cauley-Stein had an opportunity that he probably didn't necessarily deserve. And I mean, he had some moments where Luka made him look like $1 million for sure. Right. So why not?
Well, we could probably ramble a few more minutes, but I'm hungry.
Yeah, go eat.
This has been good. I'm going to try to have Bobby on. I hope, just to talk what he said, because Bobby's been doing this for a million years too, and this is it was a fun postseason. I had a really good time. We worked really hard, but that's kind of the point. Like, I tell everybody who's interested in doing this, where it's like, hey, you can't just decide you want to work in the playoffs. It's just like team building with everything else. You put together the patience to do it in the regular season, and then you explode through. And we're probably going to bring on some new staffers in the coming weeks and months just to see what else is out there in the world. But, we have a really fun team. Mavs Moneyball guys cranking out some interesting content right now. We'll have draft profiles and stuff the next only 2 weeks, because the draft is in 11 days. And then, free agency, Luka's overseas stuff, Stephen. So it's like, there's going to be enough for us to talk about to where you and I will still get together at least weekly to talk about something. So.
For sure. We'll be good. We'll keep it going.
All right, guys. This has been fun. Josh Bowe, Kirk Henderson, thanks so much for your time. And we will talk to you soon.
Today's episode is brought to you by Cars.com. With over 2 million vehicles and 50,000 more added every day, Cars.com will match you with the perfect car for you, your budget, your life, your style. And if you're ready to say goodbye to your current car, Cars.com will get you an instant offer to cash it in. Just start by entering your license plate and get matched with a local dealer who will write you the check. So whether you're looking to buy or sell, just go to Cars.com. It's magical.